Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second evening event staged in connection with the exhibition Karama, the Arab Uprisings and their aftermath. In December 2010, there were mass uprisings throughout Tunisia. These sparked off a domino effect in Algeria and Egypt. The spreading unrest also incited the people in Jordan, Morocco, Libya, Syria, Bahrain, and Yemen to protest against the regime in their countries. As we all know, social media played an important role in these uprisings. Young Arabs organized protests and demonstrations online and took photos and videos of the protests and using mobile phones and cameras. They were seen all over the world on platforms such as YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, we have the unique opportunity to take a look behind the scenes of all those blogs, posts, tweets, and YouTube videos which contributed to the fall of dictators. I am delighted and indeed honored to welcome Ms. Perihan Abuzeid among us. Ms. Abuzeid is from Egypt and co-founder and CEO of Qabila Media Productions, a company which produces online civic education videos in Arabic. Ms. Abuzeid was winner of the Best Female Entrepreneur Award at the 2012 MIT Arab Business Plan competition. In the coming hour, she will be explaining to us what influence social media has on forming political opinions. Ms. Abuzeid's talk is entitled Social Media and the Arab Uprisings. Ms. Abuzeid, welcome to the Political Forum of the Confederation. We are very eager what you are going to tell us. The platform is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you for having me. And if I speak too slow, too low, too loud, too fast, just stop me. I know that English is not the first language here, and I tend to get excited about what I'm presenting, so I might speak too fast. So just stop me in that case. Just to give you a bit of expectation about what I'm going to be talking about. So basically, I'm not going to be telling you what's right and what's wrong, what happened and what didn't happen. I'm just going to be telling you stories. Stories that I've witnessed firsthand in Egypt, since I'm Egyptian and I lived all through the revolution days, and about different practices that took place on social media that inspired or maybe mobilized the political scene in Egypt. You can choose to take what you want to apply in Switzerland or any other country, or what not to apply at all. But I'm sure you're going to see some really inspiring stories and some really useful ones as well. Just to scan the room here, how many people have a Facebook account? Cool. How many have Twitter account? How many are under the age of 40? Okay, so it's about 50% under the age of 40, and about 100% actually, pretty much everybody here has a Facebook account or a Twitter account. The reason I'm asking this, because this is the complete opposite of the Middle East, especially in Egypt. So in Egypt, actually, an interesting statistic is that 50%, the whole Arab region actually, 50% of the population is under the age of 35, and 70% is under the age of 45. So it's predominantly young generation or young population. However, in Egypt, an 82 million population or people country, there's the very optimistic says 35% illiteracy, and some pessimistic people say that it's up to 50% illiteracy rate. So you can imagine a country with 50% under the age of 35 and still 50% illiteracy make it through social media and make it through the revolution. So what I'm going to show you is just some interesting stats, and then I'm going to tell you, start with the storytelling, okay? So this one actually, it was research done, can you see? All right. a research done about the Arab population in general, about where they source their information from, what do they do. Forget about all the graphs and everything. The only interesting thing about this graph is this one over here. So people aged between 15 and 34, they rely mostly on social media, then television, or internet, then television, to source their information. Another actually survey that I was just telling Ilian about, I was reading it earlier this week. It said that people, and it's a global survey. It said that people their number one trusted source of information is friends and family. And this means that people would not believe what's said on television as much as they would believe what a friend is telling them, even if it's not true. And that's possibly why social media is a lot more effective, because the people that you find on Facebook and Twitter are your friends and family. And maybe that's why it was effective. Interesting statistic as well, only the social media penetration in the Middle East is 18%, compared to Western Europe, 36%. That's 50% of what in Western Europe has. I don't know why in Western Europe there's no revolution yet, but obviously it worked in Egypt, or in the Middle East, so it might work somewhere else. I'm not calling for a revolt or anything, but I'm just joking. And out of the 18%, only 8% of the population in 2011 had a Facebook account. Only 4% of the 18% had Twitter accounts. That's in 2011. There were 135,000 Twitter accounts in 2011. Before that, it was only 35,000. In April 2011 and 2012, it's 215,000. That's almost doubled the number of Twitter accounts in less than a year. So obviously, everybody's just got attracted to Twitter. What is Twitter? What is Twitter? What is Facebook? We want to be on it. Did it work? We'll see. So this one, I find it very interesting comparing the other countries. So it's showing here in Egypt what people, that's after the revolution, what people are searching for or looking for on social media, what kind of information they're searching for. And you see here that 63% of Egyptians that go online check politics. Before that, I can assure you, it was mostly things that I cannot say in public or just music. If you compare that to Europe, if you compare that to Britain, it's only 30%. To France, it's only 18%, 27%. So obviously, the revolution kind of sparked an interest in politics in general for the younger generation that sources information from social media. Why is all of that? I'm gonna start telling the stories now. So this is the timeline, my personal timeline of the revolution. A lot of people can just portray it differently. From 25th of Jan onwards, social media was the hype. Everybody was talking about it, and everybody, believed that it's what sparked the revolution. However, I just want to tap on a couple of events that took place actually before January 25th that might have sparked the revolution as well. One of which was the labor in 2008. It was the labor strike in Mahalla, which actually sparked a well-known movement now called 6th of April in Egypt, and it's a very young generation movement. And also the Al-Baradei, the Committee for Change, the National Committee for Change, or National Council for Change, where people actually would print out, that was the first use of digital world, actually, where people were able to print out a sheet off of the internet that basically listed certain demands that we wanted as the younger generation from our rulers, and people would just take it around and get it to be signed so that they can influence what's happening or spark change. And then nothing happened, of course. We're gonna see a lot of stories, nothing happens afterwards. But the interesting thing is that the regime was quite stupid enough to make a scene by killing Khaled Said. I'm sure you've all heard that story. And Wael Ghunaim, a Google executive, decided with his partner, Abdurrahman Mansour, they decided that this cannot just keep happening, and they started a Facebook page called We're All Khaled Said. How many of you has heard about it? Did you hear about that page? Okay, so basically, what was different about that page? And from now on, the storytelling begins. What I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna tell you the event, how that was reported and how people utilize social media to mobilize for that certain event, and whether the results were favorable or not. In often cases they were not, but in some cases they were. So I'm gonna tell you the differences between those. Okay, so, shocking, huh? That was the cover photo or the profile picture of the page that I just told you about. This is Khalid Said before he was tortured to death, and this is picture after his death. And basically the page said that we can all be this person. You know, he was somebody just like, you know, a normal person, and he was tortured to death just because he was in conflict with the police, because he had a video that basically showed them, you know, red-handed, and like a couple of police officers red-handed in a drug smuggle operation. The interesting thing about this page, I'm going to remove the picture now so it's not as shocking, is that it was different. There were actually a couple of pages. I don't know how many of you have read the book by Wael Ghanem. There were a couple of pages that were actually, you know, started about this incident. This one worked more because it had a different tone to it. It had the tone of sort of non-aggressive tone. Usually, like before January 25th, whenever anybody spoke politics, they were usually the very angry people, the very irate, the very like you know, like using language, foul language, and everything. So not every average Egyptian associated or related to such people. But what Wael Ghanem and Abdurrahman did is that they used the language of the people. They were very friendly. They were not aggressive. They were like, we're going to highlight the bad things that the police did and the good things as well. So on one week, they will show a police officer that did something really good. And on, you know, some time, they would show a police officer that did something really bad. And then what they did is that they started calling for protests, for silent, you know, sit-ins, saying that we're just going to be peaceful. We just want people to wear black, completely black, and, you know, stand on the corniche, on the seashore in Alexandria, and just stand there, do nothing, wearing black, in silence. So everybody thought, you know, I can do that. There's no harm. The police is not going to come and attack me. I'm not doing anything violent. And it started happening, one after the other, about 20 of them. Every single time, the number gets bigger because nobody can touch them. And, you know, and even when they do, they just like, you know, they walk away and they don't do anything. There's no struggle. So people feel actually more safe kind of to join such protests or such sit-ins. And then closer to, so there started happening a lot of them, and then closer to January 25th, how many, does anybody know what actually the date January 25th stand for? It's quite ironic actually, do you know? Yeah? Yeah, exactly. So January 25th is actually an official holiday, and it's the day of the police. So it's the day that we usually celebrate, technically, the police force and how good they are, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But it's an official holiday, and that was the exciting part. What they did on the page is that they started calling for, why don't, you know, for not a revolution, just a big protest. Let's take to the streets on January 25th. January 25th is going to be the day that we're all on the street, not just the people, you know, in a certain area, not just for a day. Everybody's going to go there. And then they started communicating what happened. Again, that whole story about this page, you can actually find it in the book of Wael Ghanem. I'm not promoting it, but it's an interesting story. They started basically as managers, actually anonymously. So nobody knew that Wael Ghanem and Abdurrahman were the people behind that page. The funny thing is that Abdurrahman, the other administrator of the page, was actually in the army at that time. He was doing his military service, so he couldn't even reveal his personality or his after the revolution, after everything was clear. But what they did is that they started calling for that day, and they started coordinating with other movements. So we see the Kifaya movement that started in 2005 calling for that protest as well. We see 6th of April that started in 2008, what I mentioned, starting to call for that, organizing such protest. And then we see a very nice lady called Asma Mahfouz put a video online encouraging people on the 24th of Jan, encouraging people to take to the streets peacefully, and she was like, we're gonna protect each other, don't worry. And she's just an average person. All those people were average people. They didn't look any different from anybody. And if a woman calls upon the people to take to the streets on 25th saying that it's gonna be safe and we're gonna be protecting each other, every single man, any Arab would know that it's a masculine society. So if a woman can take to the street, obviously the man can. And then came to the surprise. No, sorry. Yeah. And this happened. This was not the 25th, so I'm lying, but it was close to this. On the 25th, a lot of people took to the street, and everybody was just surprised. What's going on? These are normal people. They don't look any different. Like, what's happening? Why are they taken to the streets? But only because of the language and the mobilization through social media. And I remember actually the first invitation that I got was on a BBM, a BlackBerry message. That was it. So I was like, okay, being asked to participate in a revolution through that. And then what happened? Next morning, on the news, the national news, we see a headline saying, on the police day, chocolates and flowers are given to police officers, while people were actually being killed and sprayed with water and, shot with rubber bullets and even live bullets. That's what you see in the headlines. So imagine what happens. People were like, what's going on? We're going to prove to you actually that was not flowers. And people became kind of provoked. And it started happening more and more until the 28th. What does the government do? Does anybody know? Sure you do. They shut down all communication means. They shut down internet. I used to work for an internet service provider at the time. It was funny. But they shut down internet, they shut down the phone lines, they shut down everything. And what does that tell the people? Well, two things. First thing, obviously you're scared of something, you're anticipating something big. And two, which basically gives you a sense of power, right? When you know that the regime is scared of you, you feel powerful. When you're just a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old. And the second thing, it provokes you. If you're not going to see it on television, if you're not going to know what's going on, I'm just going to take to the street. They shut down Al Jazeera as well on that day, during the protest. So people, if I'm not going to be able to communicate with anybody, if I'm not going to be able to know anything, I'm just going to take to the street as well. And I remember very well that day, actually. We would be standing almost about to give up on getting into Tahrir Square where we wanted to gather, and then we see huge crowds of people just walking towards us. We're like, yeah, let's go all together. And that's exactly what happened. It was just surprising. And those events kept happening. Every single time, the regime would do something stupid, and then, something really stupid, and then people would be provoked, and then more people would participate. And I think that was I always say that the government's or the regime's stupidity was part of the success reasons or success factors for the revolution. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about the 18 days, the first 18 days in the revolution. What happened? What was happening on social media? Well, obviously, a lot of people felt that they wanted to do something more, especially, after the social media was shut down, they felt that, okay, obviously it's a powerful tool. So let's start doing things. And you see a lot of cool initiatives happening, one of which is mine, so I'm definitely promoting that. But you see, for instance, you see a channel on TV that was never popular before the revolution. All of a sudden became very popular because they put their content online. All the big channels started to put their content online. as opposed to just, putting it on television. People were accessing YouTube to watch Al Jazeera, to source news. Again, remember, under 35, they only source information from internet, so that was the main source. And it was usually the truth-telling source. And then he sees, young talents just, showcasing their talent on YouTube. So you see a popular, like this guy over here, Bassem Youssef, he's now called the Jon Stewart of Egypt, and he was actually interviewed by Jon Stewart in New York because he became so popular. And what he did is that he went into his laundry room and started shooting videos, making fun, very sarcastically, making fun of what's happening, the regime, what they're saying, what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. And he became popular very, very quickly because he's speaking the language of the people. He's sarcastic, which is an Egyptian thing. And he's telling the truth as well. He's, as if he's speaking on behalf of the people. This guy makes millions of pounds now. And you see all the channels, and you see us, like Qabila, what we did is that we started a company, or at that time it was just like a film club. We started videos. We're like, okay, people are getting the news, but a lot of the news has a lot of terms that people don't understand. Again, 50% illiteracy rate. If I tell them what is the difference between a presidential or a parliamentary government, they wouldn't know. If I tell them what are the three, authorities in a regime, they wouldn't know, literally. And we decided to educate the people about that in their very own language, so we started to create animation videos, again, very sarcastically, very funny, explaining what are those political terms that they were bombarded with. And surprisingly, we got millions of views, and Bassem got millions of views, and all those people got millions of views that we were actually attracted into television. So we proved that social media was the source that people would go to get the information, and also push it to the media buyers, the big players that decide what kind of content the audience should see. And that was very different, because before the revolution, it was either the government or the tycoons, the money bleep, that would just influence or decide on what kind of content the people can see. But that was different this time. People were actually, it was the era of Web 2.0 getting into Egypt. The audience influencing what they would want to see or what they can see on television as well, not just on social media. And then a very interesting thing, not just that there were content creators, there is a very, very interesting RSSD or RASSD, and it was a network that just started right in Tahrir Square, and they decided to become a news network that would just report on what's happening in Tahrir Square and put it online. Now it's actually one of the biggest and the most referred to sources in Egypt. And they're just young people that were in Tahrir Square. They just decided that we're gonna be, we're gonna use social media to report on news, because the people that are sitting on their couches at home, they don't know what's happening. They don't know the truth. We're just gonna report that with no bias, with no nothing. And they succeeded. You see millions and millions of videos were uploaded on YouTube. You see that one official in Egypt goes on television and says, there were no live bullets fired on the protesters. The very same day, at least 20 videos by people shot by their mobile phones are put on YouTube, proving otherwise. So it was an instant way of reporting on events to tell people the truth. And that was extremely significant. Now we see, it was something new in Egypt, but, if you go to Silicon Valley, you see something like Bambuser, you see something like Qstream, like huge corporations that made it over the past 5 years that only do nothing, basically, but allow people to upload videos online or live stream videos online. But we didn't have that technology. We didn't even know about it. We just decided to use our phones and just put it on YouTube, and it worked. Moving forward to 9th of March, that was a significant day. I'm only highlighting the significant days, by the way, or significant events, but there's tons of stories to tell you if you want to speak afterwards. So on 9th of March, this happened. Let me show you a video. basically, obviously there's riots, but you can't understand what's happening. What happened is that the police, now it's appearing a little bit, the police just, there was a sit-in in Tahrir Square, and the police and the military, hand in hand, decided to break that apart, to burn tents, cut down tents, tear them down, and I'm just not gonna go through the whole thing because it's long. And the bad thing is that, they tortured a lot of the protesters and they put them to military trial. Something that never happened in the time of Mubarak. That was after Mubarak's abdication. Never happened to, in the time of Mubarak, to civilians, to put them to military trial. And for those of you that don't know, military trials they're basically extremely aggressive. They would just and some of those people were kids, they were like 14, but they don't even send them to juvenile, even if they were aggressive. They just put them through military trial and put them into prison for like 10 years, and only because they were protesting, only because they were sitting, in Tahrir Square. That obviously sparked a lot of anger, but also sparked a lot of positive actions, one of which was the no military trial movement. And that's one of the strongest movements, actually, that has started since the Egyptian revolution started. It's basically a group of people, a group of lawyers that decided to volunteer to defend every single civilian that's put to military or through military trial. And they did it very strongly that they just basically, they called for marches on social media. They asked for donations to print out stickers. They did something really cool to ask people to write on their money, on their bills, no to military trials. And that went very viral, to the extent that it was very funny that on one of the protests, I remember very well seeing one of the military soldiers having a sticker on his back saying no military trials, because somebody just stuck it on his back without him noticing. Because everybody had that sticker. It was very easy to go, very common to walk into a coffee shop and see on laptops stickers saying no to military trials. Why? Because it was just like the early revolution day, it was fighting for not an interest, but fighting for a value. The value of dignity. The value of people being, Karama, exactly, Karama. The value of justice. So nobody can say no to that. Nobody can ever say that we don't want Karama, or we don't want justice. And that's why it became very viral and very strong. And the person who's behind this, she's a friend of mine, and she always says that we get people just asking us to defend them on anything because they felt that we could be the voice for justice. And that all started actually in Tahrir Square and on social media to mobilize the people. Moving forward, 6 months down the road or 7 months down the road in October, something really, really tragic happened by the military. It's called Maspero massacres. What happened is that a group of Egyptian Copts, they were protesting outside the television and radio building. And again, very peacefully, and I'll show you a video as well. And all of a sudden, the military decided that they can't take this anymore because, they're just, I don't know, maybe blocking television, I don't know, the non-truth-telling television. And they started attacking them. And over 25 people, I believe, were killed that day. And again, we see something similar to what happened during Khalid Said. We see a face put to the martyrs or the incidents. Because this guy over here, Mina Daniel, he was a famous, or he was a strong activist, maybe not known to all the people, but anybody that basically, or a lot of people that were in Tahrir Square know him very well because he was such an active person in Tahrir Square, very peaceful, very friendly, and he was killed that day. And then you see stories like, this lady over here, her fiance died. And that was another time where people realized how social media or how television even utilized stories, just like I'm telling you a story. That's exactly what they did, is that they took the story, but more than telling the story, they called for an action right after that. And that is that usually if anybody takes campaign planning, they would tell you this. If you go to care.org or change.org, or they would just tell you that if you're calling for a certain action, tell the story, and then right after it, take the action. That's what happened with Khalid Said, telling the people the story, then take to the streets. And we see things like this happening. So actually, I'll show you very quickly the video. That was on a talk show, actually, one of the very few talk shows that are not biased. Excuse the Arabic. But basically, he's showing here, he's reporting on television. He's reporting, and this is a video that was shot by a mobile phone. This is citizen journalism. A person just reporting on what happened. So basically, he's saying here that, these people were just like, they were standing there doing nothing, and the cars of the military are passing by, and all of a sudden they get attacked. So that's a protest. I'll just show them once. You see the attacks. Yeah, here. So this is a video shot by a mobile phone, telling the truth that people didn't know about. Because on that day, the most commonly sort of communicated sentiment or thought was that the Copts attacked the military. The Copts were aggressive with the military. And the reason they gave it the Copts, because they want the Muslims not to support them very much. But with a phone, people were able to tell the truth. And that's all on social media. That sparked a very, very nice movement as well. Can anybody read that? Yeah. It says كاذبون or Askar كاذبون. That's what it means. And كاذبون is liars. Because basically the movement was just saying that the military is just a bunch of liars. They're not telling you the truth. And what they did, this movement, all they did was to report on their page, and they were often actually referred to on television as well, just reporting on their page the big fat lies that the military said everywhere. So they would tell, they would say the military leadership said this, but here's the proof otherwise. So it was obviously, it was just like a biggest source for people to go and, to get evidence on how the military was, or the military leadership was bad at that time, the armed forces. Moving forward, just a month later, big events in Muhammad Mahmoud Street, which is basically, again, protesters were protesting against the abuse by the police in a street almost like 5 or 6 blocks away from the police building, police force building. That was an event. On one day, basically what happened is that people were just protesting, and a lot of people were in Tahrir Square. It's a very close street to Tahrir Square, one of the extensions actually. And on one day, all of a sudden, the military decides to attack Tahrir Square, tear down the tents, just like they did in March, and burn them, burn motorbikes, hit the people, kill people and throw them next to garbage, and just say, go on television and say those were thugs and we were protecting the square. So obviously, what happens, again, on social media, people, that this shot actually was taken from the building, that building where they were under. A person just used their phone to take a picture of this incident right there. I was standing there just 15 minutes right before this happened. And basically, that told everybody the truth. You know, it was not media, it was not television reporting on that, because obviously a reporter would be attacked, would be stopped, would be spotted easily. But people, you know, it's Tahrir Square in downtown in Cairo. It's one of the most populated areas in Egypt. So there are so many buildings to take pictures from, and just one courageous person decided to take a picture from his phone and send it off or put it on social media to tell people the truth. So that was also a picture taken by mobile. After that, there was another interesting movement that started called Masrena, which means Our Egypt. And it was actually supported by a lot of public figures, but they did something very good. They said that they wanted it to be a popular movement, not by people telling others what to do. We just want people to be just like Khaled Said, like the Kulina Khaled Said page. You know, it's not surprising to know that Wael Ghunaim was also one of the founders of this movement. And what they did, what you see here, is that it's signs. They put them up on Facebook. They uploaded them on Facebook on their page and told people, just print them out. Give them away, stick them somewhere, or, you know, just like hold them on your phone or whatever. And they said things like very, very similar, very, very simple. They said that my dignity is more important than my bread or my food. They said things like, it seems, you know, there is a martyr needed to get to get justice for martyrs that were already killed. Things like, we're not gonna, you know, we're not gonna bow down before we get to before we get to justice for, you know, addressing martyrs. And what they did is that they started calling for something called human chains, and they told people, okay, you know what? Print out one of those pieces of paper and meet us in any of those areas. And they had tons of those little maps. And, you know, all put on Facebook, not telling, you know, not even taking the names of the people that are going to be there or the phone numbers, just telling people, you know what, we're going to be there. Just come with one of those papers and join us, and we're going to have a human chain. And that's what it looked like. Anybody has been to Cairo before? Okay, so Qasr al-Aini Bridge. Okay, there's the bridge where, you know, there's the two big lines where the protesters were sprayed with water while they were praying. I'm sure you've seen that video. This bridge, for instance, was one of the spots where they met, where they had a human chain, and it was all covered from the beginning to the end with people standing next to each other with one of those signs. Nobody knew who the person next to him was or who's the woman next to him was. But it was just people, you know, and in different governments as well. So this is in Alexandria. This is, I believe, this is in Sharqiyya. Like different Cairo. I think it was in 12 different governorates actually where they had those human chains. Again, it was all called for on social media. Nothing more, nothing else. No, not even a call center. Okay, so moving on to another event, which was the parliamentary elections. And that was something different. That was not people mobilizing for protests. That was not people mobilizing for justice. That was just people promoting for certain either candidates or for, you know, promoting against certain candidates. That was mostly more popular, obviously. So that was the event. You see, you go everywhere. You see a lot of those signs. You know, just normally like the old revolution. I don't know, do you have that here? When you have parliamentary elections, do people stick, you know, posters everywhere? No? Yeah? Well, yeah, I guess we destroy a lot of trees when it comes to elections. So some interesting movements as well that were also started on social media, one of which was called Imsik Fulul. And Fulul is actually a term that was given, or a kind of a tag that was given to all the people of the past regime that still wanted to be part of the political scene, and they still do, because they want to give up on everything. So basically this page, what they did is that they started compiling a list of all the parliamentary candidates that were running for elections, obviously, and were part of the old regime so that people won't vote for them. And they started making really nasty profiles for them. This person did this and this. This person was involved in this and this and that. This person said that at that time when Mubarak was still in power, so that people were referred to them. And I remember it was actually very funny because if you had doubts, you would just go like on who to vote for. People would just go to this page and see if this person was a fulul or not before I can actually make up my mind and vote for him or not. And that was interesting, and the results actually were quite effective. Interesting thing to say, that logo is inspired by an insect killer spray, actually. So, and another movement, it was called Ehmi Sotak, and I was also happy to be part of that move, is that it was basically, what it did is that we were working on in different governorates as well, on creating that voting block. So we're working with people, and basically to influence the decision of the elections from bottom up as opposed to up bottom. So one thing that we had in all the times is that basically the parliamentary candidates would just do the executive job. They would say, okay, you know what, I'll pave that street for you, I'll do that for you, I'll do that, blah, blah, blah. But they never cared about the priorities of the people. But with this movement, and that was all started through social media as well, is that group people created communities that would set their own demands, go meet with the candidates and tell them these are our priorities. And again, that was all started on social media. An interesting thing, there was a website that was started, it's called Zabatak, which is like caught you, that's what it means. And right before the parliamentary elections, they had this map, and they told people just to go and report anything wrong that you see during the elections. If people are promoting, because we had 2 silent days right before the elections, when the elections were taking place. If you see something like this, if people are forcing you to vote for somebody, if people are pushing you away, if you see fraud happening, if you see the person in the vicinity trying to influence, just report them here. And the bigger the circle, the bigger the number of crimes that took place. And that was the result, basically. But the interesting thing is, remember when I told you about the Fulul, the people of the old regime? They got the least seats in the parliament. Some of them actually used to win for as long as anybody knows, but they lost because people just didn't want them anymore. Moving on to another dramatic event. This was significant because this guy who died over here, he's basically from Al-Azhar, which is, he was basically a religious scholar, an Islamic religious scholar who had a very high or big status in the Azhar, which is the biggest Islamic institution worldwide. And he was shot right in Tahrir Square. And that actually sparked a movement by a group of people that almost never took place or participated in the revolution since the 18 days. And that was all the Azhar scholars. So Al-Azhar is actually a university, not just an institution. It's also a university that basically has thousands and thousands of graduates every year. And all those people, all they do is that they just study Islamic studies, basically, and fiqh, and things that are related to religion. So he was basically one of their idols. And that his killing basically sparked their participation because they were so angry of what's happening. Something that we never saw before. Has anybody seen this before? Okay. So you think, they would kill this sheikh or, the Azhar scholar and would learn from their mistakes. But no, only 4 days later, they do this. So people were in Tahrir Square protesting for what happened over the past month or two, and all the people that were being killed. And you see this. And then you see this. And the person that's trying to protect her, you see this. So what happened is that basically the police that's actually the military, they just decided to beat a woman on the ground and strip her of her clothes. Very dramatic. And that was the first time that you see a strong attack on a woman, specifically to a woman, completely like she's helpless. And you see, after that, actually, you see a lot of interesting comments. You see some people that were pro the old regime, or people that were not very much against the military. They would say, why was she not wearing any top underneath? Why and yeah, all those stupid thoughts. But it's just things that you wouldn't even reply to because they're so ridiculous. But then that was the first time when we actually see a female protest or female movement taking place. So all those actually protests, they were only by females. They were like, you know, and one big sign actually said that women, Egyptian women, are red line. You cannot cross them. And since then, we see a lot of events actually just, you know, directing towards women only. Even now, we see a lot of sexual harassment for, you know, in Tahrir Square by some thugs trying to scare women off the political scene. Interesting thing to say as well is that a lot of those protests, if not all actually, were all called on social media. And again, the picture of the lady that was, nobody knows who she is up until this day. She wouldn't, because, and that's the significant part of it, because she can just be any Egyptian woman. Moving forward a few days, a couple of months later, in February, what happens? Does anybody know about what happened in Port Said, the soccer massacre? That made it to global television, I know. So basically what happened is that there was a match, a soccer game, taking place in a city called Port Said, and all of a sudden between the two biggest, or basically one of the biggest soccer team in Egypt, and another one of its biggest rivalries. Interesting thing to say, though, is that Al-Ahli, which was basically the victim in that case, it has the biggest fan club. So they say that out of all soccer fans in Egypt, 80% actually are fans of Al-Ahli. Maybe that's like an optimistic one, but the majority. And there's also a strong group called the Ultras that actually they're like the fan club, or you know, of Al-Ahli. This Ultras group, they've always been an active member of the revolution. But they were very interesting because they're very organized and they're very strong, they're very dedicated. They can easily come up with initiatives, they can easily mobilize the people, and they can easily make songs. So they made a lot of songs against the police. Things that I cannot repeat as well. A lot of them had insults, but a lot of them just told the stories and just telling them things like, you know, the revolution was a black day for you. Things like that, things that were provocative to the police officers. But they were using their talent in making songs and making cheers as a way to express their opinions. Obviously, that provoked the people. And then this happened. And in television, it was always, especially on those that were hosts that were pro the old regime, they were saying, "What could happen? Well, like this is the revolution. Is this the revolutionary spirit? You start killing each other." So 74 people died that day, and I'll tell you some horrible stories about how they died. But then again, we see videos showing videos and pictures showing the real things that happened. There was another video that we're actually going to show you, but for the sake of time, I'm not. But basically, it showed that the police officers shut down, and the soldiers shut down the gates when the Ahli fans were trying to run out of the stadium to escape, you know, being killed when they were attacked. It showed that police officers were just standing while everything is happening, while people were taking to the stadium, you know, getting down and, you know, attacking everybody, and they were just standing there doing nothing. And all that was shown again, by people's phone cameras, by, you know, and some actually television reporters just kind of like used their camera for their own interesting. They didn't care what the channel they're reporting for would say. And that made it to television. I don't mean to, you know, to be dramatic, but one, you know, just a couple of stories about how people were killed that day. One person was actually strangled until he died, stripped off his clothes, and thrown off the stadium from the outside. A 14-year-old, same thing, was actually killed and thrown off. A pregnant woman was also killed and thrown off the stadium. That all happened before the eyes of the police officers, and they did nothing. And they were only basically exposed by people's pictures and people's testimonies and videos. Interesting thing is that a lot of this one actually, these are the fans of Al Ahly club when, you know, waiting for the train that had the other fans coming from Port Said. See a lot of caricatures, a lot of graffiti. This is the youngest martyr on that day. But the interesting thing is that the ultras, they kept to their cause for over a year, asking for justice for the martyrs, given threats, saying that we're not going to bow down, we're not going to let go of that cause. And the interesting thing, almost a year later, there was a verdict that came out. The 21 people that, apart from the police, were still waiting on the verdict of the police, but the 21 people that were fans of the other club that attacked the people were sentenced to death. Moving forward to using social media for elections again, the presidential elections. We saw some interesting movements that are happening actually. One of which was that, you know, void your vote, vote, boycott, because people didn't want, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood versus, they were not accepting of the Muslim Brotherhood versus the old regime options. And then this one was a flash mob, actually in one of the busiest places in Egypt, or in Cairo, going against actually the old regime candidates. You know, people again, you know, that was another human chain actually against the old regime candidate. And then the results were actually in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it was only a 50-50 thing. The interesting thing is that all the calls that took place for boycotting did not really work, didn't do anything, while they were on social media. What was different at that time? If social media worked for everybody, why did it not work here? Because it missed field operations. It missed the common tone. Miss the language that everybody speaks. You know, not every game can be played with the same rules. And unfortunately, those people couldn't mobilize others enough to support their cause. An interesting way to monitor, there was another movement that started called Shafinkum, which means we can see you, and it all started online as well, and they started a call center where we can just report anything, and they would publish a report online on what's happening, and that was just a popular movement. Now, all what I said before, 90% of the revolutionaries would agree with. What I'm going to say now, it's only one slide or a couple more, nothing to bore you with anymore, but I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of what's happening now in the time of Morsi, okay? And that's a personal opinion because not everybody would agree with it. But you see, this guy is a journalist, just a journalist. He was killed in the attacks outside of, in a protest, actually. We see something like this. For the first time, we see Egyptians going against Egyptians, killing each other, why they actually used to belong to the same group. So they're both supposed to be revolutionaries, but they killed each other. Something like graffiti, like here, what you see. We see a law now in Egypt that's being discussed to criminalize graffiti, which was a significant part of the revolution. So people are now, are wondering whether the Muslim Brotherhood is going to, live up to the dreams of the people, the aspirations of the revolution or not. I personally believe not, but I might be wrong. An interesting statistic, initiative, it's called Morsi Meter. It's a website actually that started, people started it right the second day after Mubarak was, thank God, he's not re-elected. Morsi was elected to basically monitor his performance, and it was monitoring the 100-day promises that he gave. He said that within his first 100 days of presidency, he's going to, fulfill certain promises or, commit certain things. And that website was only doing, the reporting on those 100 days. Will he fulfill, or how much did he fulfill of his dream? It was called the Morsi Meter. You can go now and see the progress of that one. Finally, I want to share with you something really interesting. Maybe it's not very related to social media, but it's something that can be inspirational to everybody in any context, not just a revolution, but in any context, how art was actually used a significant part of the revolution and the scene that happened. So this video is very interesting. There's a company called Kharabish. They were very quick and witty, actually, with the creation of videos instantly that would make fun of everything. So this one, actually, this is a a politician, actually, and he would just play along with any government that would come to power. And this video, they just showed him sort of drumming to every single person that was in power. So, in the way that they would do it. I can show it to those interested later on. So with Mubarak, it was more of like a hip way of doing it. And then all the way to the Islamists, he's, playing the drum in an Islamic way. Just, they're making fun of him and all the likes of how they, some people just play along with whatever government that comes to power. And then music, you see, this is something that was the Qabila produced as well, but there were a lot of music videos and a lot of songs as well that came out after the revolution. And we see even a shift in the taste of what people listen to. Now we're people listening to more lyrics and things that actually said messages or educated people, something that never happened before. And then this is a theatrical performance that made it all the way to Geneva, actually. And it was called Tahrir Monologues, and it's basically people telling their stories, so of what happened in the first 18 days or even later on, and because they were told by the very same people that experienced them, and no anger, no anything bad. It became very, very popular, basically, and it made it all the way, across Egypt and across the world as well. And finally, again, graffiti, there was a significant part of the revolution. This is the street that I told you people were killed in. And what the police did is that they started in the downtown area, they started blocking a street after street with rocks. How did people respond to that? With graffiti. They just drew. This is a drawing. This is nothing but a drawing, showing that the street is still open. But it's actually on rocks. They're just sending a message, that even if you block the streets, we're still going to go through. Can you see that it's a drawing? Or okay. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful. And if you have any questions, I'm ready for them. Thank you. Thank you.
That was very useful, and I will press I like. That was very good, and I'm sure you got questions. Who wants the microphone? Nobody.
Good.
Thank you very much. This was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I would like to know your appreciation about the potential danger also, which comes from either videos or photos, where you can identify people, where police or military can identify people, and it might endanger these individuals who are protesting or whatever.
So the question is, my anticipation of what kind of danger that people can go through if they're being identified? Okay, so actually that law that I told you about criminalizing graffiti, the other part of it was actually that saying that, or proposing that for any protest to take place, the permission of the police has to be given. It cannot be more than, I think, 300 people. And the names of 3 of the organizers have to be reported. So actually, basically, they're asking for and you cannot block any streets, you cannot, a whole lot of set of rules for protests to take place. So obviously, the regime is actually looking to not just oppress the people, but also identify them and make it easier for them to catch them. I'm definitely anticipating that. That's already happening. Like, we haven't seen any change. I personally believe we haven't seen any change in the practices and the behavior of the police ever since the revolution started. We still see a lot of people that are being detained. There are a lot of people that are being tortured. A few tens of people actually were killed were tortured to death by the police after the revolution. That happened. And the interesting thing is, something that just came out a couple of days ago is that President Morsi, when he met with the police, he said that there is no such thing as cleaning up the police, you're all good people. So he's already assuming that the police doesn't have any bad people that need to be removed. So obviously, it puts us all to danger, to being identified. Even sometimes when we go to Tahrir Square and we leave, we're afraid because if our faces are known, we might be beaten. It happened to a few people, actually, a few activists that were known just because their faces appeared on social media or were on television. The police would just spot them and kind of teach them a lesson in that kind of attitude. I just think that for a lot of people, there is a certain threshold. Once you pass it, you're not fearful anymore. And for those people that are known faces now, they feel more obligated to respond to or kind of like fulfill their responsibilities. So they don't care anymore, especially because they know, like, one of which actually is want to save the person behind the no military trials. So you can imagine a person who's actually going against the military trials was put to a military trial. She was called for a military trial. But there were 21 lawyers that volunteered to defend her on that day. So just as much as you're identified to the police or the oppressor, you're also identified to the people that would defend you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question. Especially in countries where there's a higher rate of illiteracy, like you mentioned, Egypt, isn't there maybe the danger of social media being abused so that in order to manipulate people? I mean, how do you screen the information which is being put on the internet? Like Wikipedia, everybody can actually write a report or put in a picture or use tools to adapt videos, etc. How do you cope with that?
So actually, the majority of illiterate people are not even on social media. So the danger of misinforming them is more on the ground than it is on social media. But you're right, actually, even to those that are not, that are literate and are on social media, there's been a trend, actually, ever since the first days of the revolution, what we call the electronic committees, and it's a group of cyber activists that would just like hack systems, and either spot activists that are, they tried to identify Wael Ghanem, for instance, when he started that page, and that's how they got him. But also, they would create fake accounts and, say that a poll was taken and Omar Suleiman was voted the most popular president to become, things like that, or even identify people. It was always a common thing. But again, citizen journalism has always been very, very effective. Again, I believe that the biggest threat is not on social media, as it is, especially again because after the revolution, people have become a lot more critical because they saw a lot of untrue information, a lot of wrong information, so they've become a lot more analytical or critical. You see now common people that didn't care about anything before. Even when I post things on Twitter, oftentimes, if I don't put the source, people ask me, like, what is your source? Where did it come up with this information? So people are becoming a lot more critical, and they analyze things. They're very skeptical. They don't accept anybody, or sometimes to a very negative extreme, actually. But that's better than just taking things as is. The problem is with people on the street that we cannot really reach, what we call either, it's either the housewives or what we call the couch party, people sitting on their couches doing nothing, just watching television, pointing at people and saying they did this and did that. So those are the people that are more under threat to be misinformed than people on social media, I believe. And that requires a lot of ground operations or field operations. That requires a lot of interactivity with the people on the street as much as it is online.
Thank you also very much for your presentation. You were talking a lot about the revolutionary side. I would like to ask you about the other side. So can you tell us more about how the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafi groups and so others, how do they use social medias, and what other means than Facebook do they have to mobilize so many people?
So you just made an interesting assumption now that the revolutionary side does not include the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis. The stories that I told actually were right before Morsi's Morsi, was elected, and the majority of those, actually, the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis were part of it. Not everything. Like Muhammad Mahmoud, what happened on that street, they were not supportive of it. And that's where the tension started between the revolutionaries and the Muslim Brotherhood. But everybody started using social media. And the Muslim Brotherhood, now they have... Actually, one interesting thing, the very recent events where some martyrs basically fell, some people were killed right outside, in protest right outside the palace of the president. Morsi chose, instead of coming on television and giving a speech, in mourning of those people's killing, he actually put it in a tweet on Twitter. He just said, "I'm sorry for the people, for the lives that were dead, the lives that we lost." People were very angry because he didn't have the decency to at least go on television and say that, and just put it on a tweet. So obviously, the Muslim Brotherhood, they're trying to take that trend of social media, but maybe not in the best way. No, that was a sarcastic comment. But actually, they do have a very, very strong reporting online tool. So they have the paper, like a newspaper, a digital newspaper, where a lot of people would just source it, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively, because they have their own supporters writing in those papers. And a lot of times we would take sources, look what this person said. He's one of your supporters, he's one of your writers. So they're definitely using social media, they're definitely reporting. You see that on television and you see it online. You see on their own channel, for instance, the very same incident is shown differently. They're telling true stories, but from a different perspective. So in one incident, for instance, where the supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood and the protesters fought together, 7 people died, 5 from the protesters and 2 from the Muslim Brotherhood. And then you go on television and social media pages of the Muslim Brotherhood, they were only covering the 2 that were killed. So they're not lying, they're just not telling the full truth. So they're using it, yeah. But it's working. The thing is, since Morsi has been elected, what has been mostly more effective is actually being on the ground than it was social media.
Merci. Thank you for your performance.
Thanks. I feel like I was dancing or something.
I'm obliged to ask this question,
sure,
because the situation now obliged me to do it.
Sure.
As you know, what is happening now in Tunisia and what happened last week, I think, in Egypt,
yep,
and the boycott, not the boycott, the stopping YouTube because of
yep,
that film. And in Tunisia, many people, Islamists and Salafis and Wahhabis, which are calling to kill each other. Don't you think that the bad use of internet, of social media, is just begun? Thank you.
So the incident actually in Tunisia is kind of different from what happened in Egypt. So the ruling, it's a court, for those of you that don't know, the Egyptian courts just ruled that YouTube is going to be shut down for 30 days in Egypt in response to the video insulting Prophet Muhammad. Interesting thing is, once YouTube is back on, that video is going to be still accessible. So they haven't really done anything. Obviously, it's a politically influenced verdict that all analysts actually don't believe it's going to be applied. There's a lot of laws, one of which actually is blocking all porn sites or pornography sites that was by the parliament. And you can still access anything that you want now. So there's a lot of rules or laws that just, you know, kind of get decided on for political reasons, but they never take place. They're never actioned. However, to answer your question, actually, and it's not just against social media. One of the threats and one of the big scares now, or fears, amongst a lot of Egyptians, a lot of sincere political activists as well, is the possibility of a civil war. One thing that a lot of people can't realize, a lot of people in power, a lot of political leaders can't realize, including the president themselves, is that when the elections took place, it was almost 50-50. So it was, you know, people almost 50% going for Morsi and 50% going for the old regime. So that wasn't alarming enough, apparently, for the people that, you know, people are actually divided. They're not. It's not like there's no majority. And right now, what we're seeing is the Muslim Brotherhood taking one side, and then we're seeing the liberals taking another side. And mostly, they're just after their interests, both groups. Not just, by the way, not just the Muslim Brotherhood. They're mostly after their interests. Very few people, which are becoming the minority kind of thing, they're after the true demands of the revolution, because it was kind of subsided from a value-based demand system to an interest-based demands, and that kind of changed the whole situation. Now people are dividing more and more and more. What I'm hoping for, I'm always optimistic, by the way. I'm always floating up with the clouds. So I personally believe that things are going to be changing. But we're seeing now, like, if all those things that I showed you here, they're still active, they're still very strong, and they're still very young. I mean, it's usually monitored or organized by young people. So, you know, the most optimistic rule is that the rule of nature is in our favor. Those old people, something might happen to them at some point. So yeah, I guess what you're saying is right. It might spark something really negative, but not maybe it's just on the short term, not on the long term. Especially if you're looking for your interests, people are eventually you're gonna be exposed eventually. So hopefully they get exposed quickly, both sides.
First of all, thank you very much for the very thought-provoking talk, and I have maybe several questions which are a bit more technical. First of all, I would like to know which medias you would say were, social medias were most important for the preparation of the revolution and the social movement, which were mainly used, and if the use of, let's say, Facebook, Twitter, or messages had a socio-democratic scheme. So you would say younger people only use Facebook and Twitter, bit older people maybe rather messaging, and how this would reflect on society in general.
So the first answer to your question actually was Facebook. So even the YouTube videos went viral on Facebook. They were shared on, as Facebook was by far the one platform that was used the most. In the beginning of the revolution, it was mostly the younger generation that were communicating. Even until this day, the majority are the younger generation. But even when you go to the streets, you would see usually the younger people in Tahrir Square. Now you see people of all ages. So it's shifting, I guess. I know that my dad joined Facebook about a few months ago, so that's a change. What's that? For child, yeah. No, I rejected his invitation.
Yeah, a rather basic question, but still, I feel like unanswered. Can you please tell me, what would you say is like social media is just like it catalyzes like the revolution?
Exactly, it's a catalyst, it's a tool.
But it's not, without it, it would even happen, you know? You would say that it's still...
That's a very interesting question. My personal opinion, I would say that if one thing of everything that happened didn't happen, the revolution wouldn't have happened. So if Tunisia didn't happen, if the labor strike didn't happen, if Khalid Said didn't die, you know, if the elections in 2010 weren't forged, all those things, if they didn't happen, sometimes things just kind of conspire for a certain thing to happen. So, yeah. But it was definitely a tool. Just look at social media as a tool, not the solution.
Actually, I have a lot of questions about your personal opinion, but I know that you're here to talk about social media, not to judge politically anybody or any party or the current situation.
I can tell you my personal opinion. I don't care.
Right.
No problem.
My question is about, do you think social media one day will be used as a tool for education? Because what we can see right now, most of social medias have age limits, so it's available for youth, but not for young and children. The second thing, some people might say that all those dramatic, disturbing images that we saw in your presentation or performance, as some people might prefer to use, so violence and torture, a lot of people might say, actually, this is part of the culture in the Middle East, Arab, Muslim countries, because you see violence, torture within the family, in school. I grew up in Egypt and I studied in Egypt, and I would agree in that in certain extent, because violence, it exists in education institutes in Egypt, whether public or religious, etc. So some people might say social media and revolutions might not be the sustainable way to change those kind of culture and countries. We need sustainable change through education. So long story short, do you think social media might be a tool of change through education?
Okay, short answer to the long story. I don't think, I know. So there's already, that already started. There is two very, very strong initiatives. One of them has become very popular, called Tahrir Academy, which is the Arabic version of Khan Academy. It was funded actually by Wael Ghunaim. What he did is that he took the money he got from his book and he put it into this foundation to solve the problem of education, use technology to solve the problem of education. So now they have thousands of videos online that teach people physics in an animation video. To solve that problem. There's actually the number one problem that was addressed after the revolution by activists, by foundations, by organizations, was education. Nothing else. Because the education can be solved without the government being involved, I guess. Yeah.
Could you tell us more about the sexual violence against women on Tahrir Square and who's behind it, what's the official version, and what does social media report on it, and what do people think or say about it?
If I knew who's behind it, it wouldn't have happened, I guess. I wish I know who's behind it. It's something, sadly, I would have to say that sexual harassment was always something that you would see in Egypt. It's not something it's not something new. What's new is that it's that excessive and that violent. We never saw something like this before. And there's a lot of theories behind that, but the strongest theory behind it, which is a conspiracy theory that I personally believe in, because the interesting thing about all those sexual harassment incidents is that never was one person caught, and even when they were caught and taken to police, nothing happened to them. The couple of people that were kind of like beaten and taken to the police. So the conspiracy theory that is kind of spreading is to basically those are hired harassers to scare the women of Tahrir Square so that they don't take an active part in their political scene, because the more women participate in protests, the more men participate in protests. And women were always the mysterious part of everything happening in Egypt. I was just talking to Eliane about that earlier, actually. And housewives, as I said before, or even women, were usually only seen in any political scene, basically, when there is voting, when they're voting on anything. So we only see them lining up outside the voting vicinity. So nobody was able to reach them, to tell them the truth until they actually go and vote. So now that more women are taken to the streets, participating, being active politically, it's something that can cause a lot of threat to whatever existing regime. So I personally believe in that theory, that it's something trying to scare us off the Tahrir Square.
So I use a lot of social media myself, and I can see that's a very useful tool in certain terms. But what I've seen to come to in the past few years, like the past 2 years, and especially the past month, is, well, I'm sorry, I guess it's a question in 2 parts. Part 1, do you think that social media only worked because the firms, the companies, the social media companies, the platforms seated in the USA, mostly, actually I guess all of them, had an interest in letting this senseless things happen? And second, do you see a threat in the way it's been handled now, that more and more restrictions are being made, and that the US America has got most of the servers on their homeland? And I don't know if you know about the last treaty that hasn't been signed. So do you see actually a threat or a possibility to undermine the threat, or are you even planning to do something like a known platform not being able to be censored again?
Yeah, so actually, not just that. So what happened on the 28th of January, when everything was shut down, that was an action taken by the Egyptian regime. They just shut down the servers, kind of thing. But then we saw changes in the policies, and that was not only inspired. Actually, that was an interesting thing. So we saw changes in the policy of Twitter, of Facebook, and of Google, allowing governments to interfere in shutting down or deciding what content can keep being broadcasted on social media. And that was something that was never on social media before. That actually defeats the purpose of social media. But that was something that kind of, like, you know, the Arab Spring kind of, you know, like, got a certain lamp to light up in the minds of the US government and other governments as well, telling them that this can very well happen, especially because we saw a lot of other events happening in other countries as well, including Wall Street. So you're right. It's actually it's a big threat. It happened as well that one page, there was a page on Facebook that started calling for the third Intifada by the Palestinians, and it was shut down by Facebook. While there was another one insulting. There were many actually insulting Prophet Muhammad, and it was refused it was refused to shut them down under the sentiment, or basically the thought of freedom of expression. And so yeah, you're right, it is a threat, and that's why, again, I say that being active on the ground is just as effective as social media, or as important, if not more important. So one thing that we do, we take our videos with initiatives and we tour the country to basically broadcast them in classes and in workshops to educate the people. So if they don't have access to see it online, or at one point, if you know, the court decides to shut down YouTube, then we can still exist and educate the people.
I have another question to social media. As I understood, you have a lot of examples where you have what the officials say is wrong and what social media says is right. So you have this black and white sort of thing. How would social media be useful if you come in if you come to a stage where you have more different argumentations of what's wrong and what's right, and which kind of social media would you favorize? Which kind of media would you?
You see debates. You see a lot of debates actually and discussions happening on Twitter, even more than Facebook. So somebody tweets something, and then you see, especially if they're, I know for a fact if I tweet something and I get one of those celebrities that have hundreds of thousands of people following them retweeting my tweet, I know that I'm gonna get at least like 50 responses against me and 50 other with what I'm saying. So you see a lot of discussions actually happening on Twitter, and it's become the most effective actually when it comes to changing or different opinions, because it's short. So it's only 140 characters, so it's easier for people to respond, and you can just simply respond with a source and shut everybody's mouth.
Is there one last question? There is one in the corner.
Hi. I realized that there have been a lot of reports that in China you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people hired by the government to basically hunt down people who say subversive things online. And it's probably not the same numbers in Iran, but that exists. To what extent do you predict that future governments in the Arab world will start hiring people to really subvert future revolts from occurring electronically?
They already started. So yeah, it already exists. As I said earlier, actually, it has always been part of the political scene kind of thing. Like, you know, ever since the beginning of the revolution, there were always those cyber activists that would just, like, you know, spot down people. But the interesting thing is that the current regime is going more for kind of like suppressing people with the law than suppressing them, you know, with more oppression. So they're using something like this law that I just mentioned to organize protests, to basically limit the number of people that are active in certain protests or something. But it's already happening, and you see actually something happened very interesting. One psychologist, she's a psychology professor who's very popular now, and she went on television and she put on her Twitter, she put in a tweet that Morsi became like a monster after he took power. And the presidential office sued her for this, for insulting the president. So yeah, there you go.
Perihan, Abuzeid, thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Very interesting 1.5 hours with you.
Thank you. Wow, 1.5. Thank you. Thanks. I'll be here.
I got 2 remarks. One is there is an apéro served 2 floors down, and you are all invited. And another thing is the Café Karama right in that next room. It's open every Wednesday, every Thursday, morning 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and on Friday afternoon. So we would appreciate it if you would come once a time to our Café Karama. Thank you very much.